Alright, today we're reviewing Ska, The Rhythm of Liberation by Heather Augustine. I got my copy as a Christmas gift, and I had a hard time tearing myself away from reading it to interact with friends and family around the holidays. This was a book that I read with great enthusiasm over the course of 3 sittings. This was a book that just hooked me in, and it was an enjoyable trip cover to cover. Now, given the checkerboard print on the cover, I'd say this book embodies a certain two-tone duality. It's academic, and it's educational, while also being wonderfully entertaining. It's the sort of book that wouldn't feel out of place in a college music theory class, or in a travel bag as recreational vacation reading. The book does an incredibly thorough job of cataloging the history of ska, but it isn't burdened by length. All the fat's been trimmed, and it's amazing the amount of ground and information the author covers in less than 200 pages. It's a book that's tuned to perfection, and I enjoyed it greatly. In addressing why I like this book so much, I need to speak to my own history with ska. As much as I'd like to claim being a genuine old-school Rudy, that's simply not the case. I'm a Johnny-come-lately. The Two-Tone record label predates my own birth by several years, and I wasn't scooting around the crib in checkerboard diapers. I wasn't a hip toddler. The Two-Tone Miles persona is just me latching on to a movement whose ideals and aesthetics seem timeless to me. My own history with ska started in the 90s, where a few bands were able to get their hooks into me. Most notably Less Than Jake, Catch-22, and the Aquabats. But it wasn't well into the new millennium that I started to look backwards to ska's roots. The more traditional sound of the Toasters hooked me, and I followed the trail backwards from Two-Tone Army to Two-Tone Records to Trojan Records. I've always been looking at ska in a diffuse and reverse chronological way, which is why this book, in its attempt to catalog ska historically from origins to present day, succeeds greatly in informing. It fills in a lot of the missing information. My brain would make sweeping generalizations, things like Prince Buster created ska, or that Laurel Aitken single-handedly exported ska from Jamaica to Britain. And that's not really the whole story. It's a great oversimplification. And this book helped fill in the gaps in my mind and pointed out some of the fundamental misunderstandings in my own knowledge of ska's history. I particularly enjoyed the first chapter where the author describes Jamaican musical culture from post-Columbian exchange up to the early 1900s. It does a wonderful job of chronicling the styles and traditions that would later give birth to ska. And I think it does a wonderful job of championing the thesis that ska simply could have not come from anywhere else in the world. This book takes us through Jamaican ska, the two-tone movement, American third wave ska, as well as ska all over the world. The book is just chock full of information, and the prose is engaging and entertaining. Now, the author could have conceivably parted things out into smaller volumes, but I think the decision to go start to finish in a single cohesive volume was a great way to go. The book succeeds greatly in telling the whole story. I found myself most captivated by the chapters chronicling the genesis of Two-Tone Records and its reaction to the politics of its day. I also really enjoyed the sections chronicling the heyday of Moon Ska Records. Someone living in the Northwest, I think the author did an excellent job of capturing all the bands important to my local scene. And any book that's going to give a nod to General Rudy can simply do no wrong in my book. I'm a huge General Rudy fan. Take Your Place was brilliant start to finish. It's a band I wish we could have gotten more out of. So to have General Rudy get some lip service in the pages of this book, that just was really cool. There was really a lot to like about this book. I also really like that the book refused to pull punches or sugarcoat anything. Ska's had its share of hard times, from the exodus of ska bands from radio airwaves in the late 90s, to the closing of Moon Records, to two-tone bands fronting new lineups other than the original lineup, to the infiltration by racist subcultures, to the deaths of some of the Skatalites and other founding pioneers of the movement. It presents these hardships with a scholarly quality. It doesn't make judgments, it informs. It simply is what it is. And by including these hardships, I think it makes the whole volume just that much more complete. I also think the academic approach keeps things grounded in reality. It would be easy to opine about what a fourth wave of ska might sound like, or postulate on ska rising to prominence once again. And thankfully, we get none of that. By concluding the volume with ska all over the world, the author kind of tactfully sidesteps the issue altogether. Whether or not ska will become popular again or unite under some fourth wave moniker, it's kind of irrelevant. As an art form, ska is alive all over the world, and so long as there are musicians playing in the style, there'll be a fan base there to receive it. I do find the assertion that ska came in on the heels of grunge, born out of a desire for something lighter, to be an interesting thesis and an interesting point of discussion. My own recollection is I seem to recall the rotation on the local alternative station would go from, say, Nirvana to Real Big Fish to Presidents of the United States of America and back again. It was all just kind of one big melting pot. Perhaps it's my own recollection of events or kind of how things were filtered through by where I lived, but where I lived, the alternative station was the dominant station. And that always struck me as the downfall of alternative music. At least where I lived, alternative simply kind of became mainstream. It ceased to be an alternative to the culture and simply became the culture. Eventually, the genre fractured and splintered as a result of having grunge, punk, ska, and a whole assortment of other subgenres all under one banner. There just kind of wasn't the unity and cohesiveness to hold it all together. The alternative banner just sort of imploded and kicked out the individual subgenres more or less intact. So it was interesting to hear the viewpoint that ska offered a lighter alternative to grunge. I seem to recall that the stations just kind of threw them all together on the set list to make money. But I think Heather does a great job of championing her case. I definitely want to commend the author's work to supplement her own understanding. If you look at the references section, it's clear that Heather did her homework. She clearly spent time tracking down books and articles doing her research. But peppered throughout the references under entries for, Black and Schaefer and Sterling and others, you'll see numerous author interviews. This book was more than just a library hunt. And Heather clearly took great initiative to ask questions and fill in every last nook and cranny. Ska: The Rhythm of Liberation was an enjoyable read cover to cover. It's a quick, easy read, and the writing style is rock solid. Each page is jammed full of facts, and the book covers a ton of ground in a svelte 160 pages. It's simultaneously informative and entertaining. It's just a great book and should be essential reading for ska fans.